Hello, Joe.
Hi, Suzi, how are
We're
you?
united here on Zoom with you in Dubai and me in Somerset.
Indeed, here we are.
Absolutely. And we at ORA are so excited about the premiere of your work, All Shall Be Well, which will be live at 7 p.m. on the 11th of July as part of the Live for London Summer Festival. And I really wanted to talk to you about the process of this commission from the very early, the earliest mootings of this project in 2018. So it's been fermenting for a while. But the brief for your commission was to use a pre-existing piece as a point of inspiration. And I really wanted to ask you how you do that, how you approach it.
Ah, yes, well, it's a lovely way to have to consider music, actually, to look back at something that's already written and find a way to use it. And I've done that a few times, actually, in different ways with different pieces, and I do enjoy doing it. So in the past, I've used the beginning of a piece. So I've done that with a piece of Bird. I literally took the first 5 bars and used that as the start of my piece and then went somewhere else with it. That was a piece for Sydney, Sussex. And then I've sometimes taken, a few bars from a piece. I took in Ifagilini's commission for their last Live from London Spring. One of the pieces there, The World Shall Be Charged, it was the 3 bars from the end of a piece of Leighton, God's Grandeur, which I took out of that piece, and then I used that as basically the whole piece. But this is completely different, actually. So this one uses an entire pre-existing piece as the basis, as a cantus firmus, and the thing runs through the whole piece entirely. So I haven't done that before, but that was quite a nice change for me, actually.
Look, there's a lot of debate going around at the moment about the relationship between commissioner and composer and how interventionist it should be. And do you find that relationship interesting? And are different commissioners different in the way they approach? Do they ask to have some sort of input? I felt that composers, they like to have something to structure their ideas or to springboard from. But sometimes it's better to be less prescriptive. So to give some structure, but not be too prescriptive. How do you find that relationship between the commissioner and yourself?
Well, I quite like it when people have an opinion, actually, because I like that. I like the relationship that exists. I think so much of your time as a composer is on your own, being a hermit, just writing in a very solitary way, and the investing, which is basically what you're doing, that interest, that desire to contribute from the commissioner's side is actually kind of welcome. I've never had anyone overstep it. I know that I've had colleagues who've kind of felt a bit press ganged into doing something, but I've never felt that, and I think I would be happy to be robust if I didn't want to do something. I mean, what's been interesting in yours is that the text was suggested to me.
Yeah.
So, and I wasn't suggested the whole text. I was given a bunch of things, a bunch of ideas from Julian of Norwich, a lovely collection of quotations from which I was welcome to choose any or potentially add some. Now that was a great.
Yeah, if I could just intervene, because the third party in all this, of course, is the sponsor, the person who's paying for the commission, and it just so happens that our generous and wonderful sponsor specifically wanted Julian of Norwich, and so in some ways that was the starting point, wasn't it?
It was the starting point because I think, as I understood it, when you've been commissioning, you've been looking for a fit with a number of elements, and one of those would be, if the text is Julian of Norwich, then ideally the piece should be from that era, and that is middle of 1350 kind of time. And actually, of course, looking for a choral piece from that era is somewhat tricky, because it tends to be medieval specialist groups that are performing that kind of material, and so not sort of middle of the range repertoire, standard, well-known works that every choir is doing, that kind of thing. And also being English, because Julian of Norwich needed to find something that would fit with that as well. So that was kind of, and that was really interesting actually. So I did a lot of scurrying around and listening to many recordings by different medieval groups to see what people were doing and what really appealed to me. And that's how I found the Selimaris Nankaparis piece of music, the little trio, which I've used for your piece. And that's called a rondellus. It's like a little, it's a bit like a round. It's a little repeating little, it's got, it's 3 parts, and it's quite instrumental in its texture. And it comes with different parts overlapping, so it's almost with 3 equal voices. The bottom part is a slightly lower part. It could be 3 altos, or it could be 2 tenors and the baritone. It's quite flexible. And it has a fantastic idiom, because it goes like a little engine with quite relatively fast note movement, but very slow harmonic movement. So it feels static, and yet there's quite a lot of actual, movement within it. And as a result of that, of course, in this sort of reasonably static harmonic cadential movement, sort of repeating little cadential figures throughout, you can build something that works in a way a bit like a brown bass. You take a harmonic idea which repeats, and then you can add harmonies to that give you the sense of it moving somewhere else. So that's what I've chosen to do with that particular piece.
Actually, it's very interesting. This commission is slightly different. I mean, the principles of philosophy is the same as our previous 48 commissions, but because the idea, it was to create a bridge between the 2 golden eras, as I see them, the golden renaissance and today's golden age of choral composition. And so the pieces that we, with the composers, have historically chosen have been sort of great masterpieces of the Renaissance, which of course, because they are masterpieces, they can provide real energy in terms of the inspiration to create something new. Now, this piece is obviously an enchanting piece. Would you say it's for its time, a piece of very, very high quality? Is it in some ways a forward-looking piece, or would you say it was quite a standard piece?
It does amuse me that it's like the sense of the golden age back then and the golden age now, because I was thinking of a far different comparison, because of course when Julian of Norwich was in her little anchorage on the side of this chapel in Norwich, that was in the middle of a pandemic, the Black Death, which 60 to 80% of the population died, and now here we are in another one.
Well, I was going to ask you about the text and the Julian of Norwich text. Is this a modern piece? Is this something that we could find modern with some modern ideas today?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think there's been quite a lot of interest in Julian of Norwich recently for many different reasons. I think, funnily enough, the pandemic thing, I mean, that's only, when I started thinking about this piece, the pandemic wasn't on the horizon, because we go back a bit with that. But I've noticed a lot more interest in Julian of Norwich lately, and because her role was, praying on behalf of the community. Her job, if you like, was to sit in this tiny little anchorage, this little tiny room, and to take all the prayers on behalf of the city to God. And the way that she does it is so different to anyone else's writings. And the Revelations of Divine Love was the first book in English by a woman. And there's this very strong sense of femaleness, which I think everyone points out, and that really stands out, that she's regards, she looks at the femaleness of God, the femininity, or the motherhood. And that direct kind of description doesn't really appear in anyone else's writing. And so I think that struck a chord, because of course there's been a lot of, the Me Too movement, there's just been a lot of awareness that maybe things have been overlooked for women. I didn't write this piece as a feminist diatribe, but it just does. I did enjoy that element of it, I have to be honest.
Well, it will be a piece of its time, for sure, in so many respects. Yeah.
And there's also, I mean, also in the piece, there's a talk about suffering. You see, she suffered immensely. They think that she was about 30 when she wrote the Revelations, and she was badly disabled and very, very ill, and so probably in quite a lot of pain all the time. And she talks about suffering quite a lot, and there's this sense of suffering being something for a greater purpose, I suppose, or that it's a way of engaging with God. That when she was required to look, I think the priest took a crucifix to her and asked her to look at it, and in her voice in her head said, no, you must look at divine heaven, look up and look away. But when she heard that voice, she thought of it as being a temptation to look away, so she forced herself to look at the cross, to look at the suffering of Christ. And all the way through the Revelations, I think that is the theme: not to look away from suffering, to face it head on, to embrace it. And I thought that was really interesting, because of course everyone's had to do that lately. Everyone, I mean, suffering's been a part of so many people's lives, and the idea of having to face it head on and embrace it is quite a positive approach, really. It's not an answer. I don't think there's an answer in that sense, but it is sometimes really helpful for people to have a direction to face in when it doesn't appear apparent what one should be doing. And I think in that sense, the text is kind of helpful, really. So I do mention that, and then her proclamation that, on behalf of God, the light, the grace, the motherhood, things that she's saying that are incredibly forcefully positive, that are radiant. Those sorts of thoughts, I think, are very helpful. I think there is a sense of radiance in that very famous line that everyone knows, all shall be well. And I think, and in my piece, that's a central part. And that's why I called it that, unaware that you were going to call your concert the same name.
I know.
So there we go, synergy.
Astonishing, isn't it? And now, your premiere, All Shall Be Well, I'll just remind everybody, it's going to be 7 p.m. on Sunday the 11th for Live from London Summer Festival. And the programme is a combination of Renaissance music and contemporary works, and kind of threaded together by readings from across the ages. Hence we create the tie with your earlier reference, musical and textual references. Now, what should the audience who are listening to this piece for the first time, what would you want them to listen out for? How would you like to prepare them for this?
Well, I'm so pleased that you have decided to put the original piece, the Stella Maris and Paris, which isn't something that you would normally see in a concert program. It's not going to, shout out, and people are not going, "Hey, why don't we do that?" It's not that kind of piece. So, just three little parts like that, equal parts. It's not your average choral concert fodder. So, but I'm really delighted you're doing that immediately before my piece, because I think that gives people something to hang on to, because once you've heard that, then you will see the piece differently, and it's very memorable. It's very distinctive, and I think having got that, then my piece begins with that idea, and then the whole of the piece, that whole little Stella Maris and Paris, is actually goes along through the first part of my piece. So you will hear it twice, effectively. You'll hear it when they do it on their own, and you'll hear it in my piece constantly, in its entirety, up to a certain point where it changes, and then I use bits of it throughout the rest of the piece. So I think, okay, that's a sort of composer type brain talking. That's like, well, if you want to look at the technical thing, listen for that. There is also, I think that probably the way that the text overall, I mean, it's always a good idea to know what you're listening to in advance. If the audience has a chance to look at the text in advance, it might be a nice thing, because then you don't have to go, what are they singing? Because you've had one look at it already, and then your expectations are slightly aligned, and then you're more interested in how's that going to work, and then it frees you to just follow the lines. And I think that's what I
absolutely agree. It is so important that you're aware of the text, because it can be the direct access to the text can be blurred by intervention, obviously, of music and all its implications. So yeah, I hope they will be able to see or hear the text in advance. Well, Jo, all the way over in Dubai, what an amazing time it's been since we first had this idea, and our wonderful sponsor, who's extremely engaged and very, very hugely supportive. This is for her late husband. It is dedicated, the performance is dedicated to her late husband. I think that it's going to be a very, very special event, and I want to thank you very much for your brilliance.
Such a pleasure.
And your commitment and everything else. And we'll see you on the night.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Jo.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.